I want to introduce our fantastic panel today. We are joined by three amazing guests. Graeme Lovelace, editor of the Charting Gen AI Substack. Also tonight by Rhiannon Williams, who's a reporter for MIT Technology Review, and Nick Parnes, CEO of Kalel Productions, who also made a dispatches that you might have seen recently called Will AI Take My Job?, which is obviously something that might be on your mind at the moment, either for you or members of your family, perhaps. So there's a lot to dig into. The subject is very broad; it's changing all the time. But we've got some real experts with us. We've had some questions in already, so thank you for those. But if you would like to send some in, we'd love to hear from you as always. And do send them in. We'll try and get to as many as we can in the next hour. I'm going to first of all ask our panelists the same question, which is, how do you use AI in your personal life at home and also at work? Graeme Lovelace, can you start us off?
Absolutely, yeah, fantastic. Good evening, everyone. I use Gen AI very, very sparingly. I actually like to use the chatbots to just see how much they know about copyright infringement. So I actually screenshot the actual chatbot saying, yes, we've infringed copyright or violated copyright. They can't help themselves. They always give up.
Nick Parnes?
In my personal life, just to know what time to go to the theatre or that kind of thing. But certainly at work, we use it quite a lot in our TV production company to transcribe scripts, to use it in pitching materials that we send to broadcasters. That's not for broadcast materials. But then also, we think of ways of using AI to come up with the next new TV idea, actually.
Right, that's amazing. We'll get a bit more on that. And Rhiannon Williams, tell us, do you use it at home and at work?
So on a work level, yeah, I use it quite a lot just in terms of putting models kind of through their paces, especially if it's like a new sort of system or a platform that's come out recently. I recently had a sophisticated AI clone made of myself by a company called Synthesia, which sort of mapped to me using like footage that they'd shot of me in their office just to see how closely it could match my movements and kind of idiosyncrasies. In my personal life, generally, I don't use it a lot. No, I'm always kind of like I'm open to what it can do in terms of what I've learned through work context. But personally, I'm a bit of a Luddite insofar as I don't sort of habitually use it to create like pictures or videos or songs outside of that kind of experimental work context.
And I have to ask what the clone was like. How good was it?
It looked eerily like me, but I think where it sort of fell down was the voice was spot on, but it made very weird, jerky, repetitive movements that I think if anyone watched for long enough, I think if you didn't know me personally, you might be like, sure, I imagine that is how that really intense woman is all the time. But I like to think friends and family might have been a bit more like, oh, that's really uncanny and weird, but who knows?
Well, that brings us very nicely to Nick Parnes, because Nick, you made this fascinating programme with a great surprise at the end, if people hadn't guessed that the presenter was in fact AI generated, worrying for all of us who earn a living from being on a screen. Just tell us, first of all, a bit about the presenter. What was her name and how difficult was it to create her?
Aisha Gaban was her name. I forgot what her name was. We were a bit worried
We're
about
seeing
that.
her now on screen, I think.
Oh yeah, there she is. We were a bit worried about that because obviously, we only thought of the name about a few days before the program came on, so there would be no online footprint for her. So therefore, if anyone looked it up during the program or in the press release before, they would realise that it was not a real presenter. But anyway, the point of having her was more to, even though some people complained that she was taking some real presenter's job, which is true, it was more we were trying to make a point that it could happen rather than we're going to do this the whole time. But certainly it was definitely, I mean, not that you've asked this, but it was definitely a challenge creating a realistic AI presenter in the time and budget that we had. The technology isn't there this week to do that completely easily, but it will be there to do it in a few months' time. It changes all of the time. The technology gets better and better week by week.
Are you able to tell us how you did create it and what were the hurdles and the difficulties?
Well, we used a company called Seraphine Valora. They are a company that did the first fashion model for, I think it's Guess Jeans for Vogue magazine. And we got a few different companies pitching to us about how they would do it. No one had done it before, where they've created a presenter from scratch. The easier way of doing it is using a real person and then amending existing videos to create them to generate them saying or doing different things than what they were actually doing. Anyway, so yeah, it was we got an external company to do it, and it was a lot of going backwards and forwards, getting the presenter to be as believable as possible and to not glitch. You know, that it was a quite a laborious but fun process in terms of just methodically getting it as perfect as it can be. But if you're looking carefully, you would now, now knowing what she is, if you watch the program again, you would tell pretty quickly, I would have thought.
Yes, and Graeme and Rhiannon, I don't know whether you've had a chance to see this program and what your sort of initial take is on that, because obviously this was a filmed documentary. It's a different thing to what I do, which is live TV rolling news. It's different from live entertainment. And Graeme, do you think that is, and we're already seeing a lot of experimentation with this anyway in other countries and other formats, but do you think that is a genuine direction of travel? And I ask this not just purely in self-interest, but it's about, are people going to be able to believe who they're seeing and who they're listening to?
Well, people talk about the uncanny valley. Can we actually spot that we're actually looking at a machine, a robot? And does it make us feel a bit, it's a sort of an unnerving feeling. Is this a human? Is this something else? I got that with Nick, with your character, Nick, at the end, with the reveal. I did spot that quite a way earlier, actually. But there's still something not absolutely there, not quite right. The scene looks quite flat. The face looks flat. I've been writing a lot about the Tilly Norwood effect. So as well, there's another character that a studio called Particle 6 has created that the creator of that, Aline van der Velden, claims is very soon to be signed to an actual actor agency. She's got big plans for that for next year. It still looks a little bit too primitive for my liking.
Rhiannon, what's your take on this?
I write a feature for our magazine called the AI Hype Index, and I like to sort of highlight some of the best and worst uses of AI over the last month. And I used Nick's example as like a good example. I think it was very clever. If you're going to write a whole show around, the very, very pertinent, obvious subject of can AI take my job? It's the perfect time to illustrate exactly what it can do. And I think you would have persuaded a lot of people that may not have thought it was possible otherwise. But I think Graeme is correct insofar as, like, if you know what to look for, there is still that weirdness. Like when you interact or you watch an AI generated avatar, or in the Tilly case, an actor, talk at length for a while, you see repetition, you see certain things. They don't tend to blink that much, although it's easier to program them. So it's definitely getting better in terms of how close. So we're narrowing that uncanny valley gap between what is real and what is clearly artificially generated. It's getting much better, but it's still not quite there. I don't think it's fully 100% convincing that it could fool everyone, that it would come across. The skeptics would still work it out, I think.
And Nick, as you obviously say, things are changing daily, really, aren't they? When you say that it will get there in the next few months, in various different ways, how do you see that affecting the whole of our industry in terms of not only presenters, but obviously contributors and the formats that you could then generate?
I think I mean, when I was saying it gets better and better, like, as an example, the voiceover, I was worried that because we were using an AI presenter, and because all of the voiceover therefore was AI generated, using a company, by the way, called 11 Labs, because of that, I was worried that the program had a bit of a cold feel to it and wouldn't be as a welcoming a program, especially because it's not fronted by someone who's well known. it's fronted by this complete unknown person, and she's got quite a cold voice. However, that said, as we kept change, as you know, when you make TV, you put the voiceover in the last minute because you don't have the real presenter with you until you get them for the last week of the edit. That's how we did this. It kept changing, that how good the voice was and how warm the voice was and how realistic the voice was kept changing week on week. So the program kept getting warmer and warmer throughout. So I think that it will be more convincing, and programs will use it more. We just want to use AI in a creative way. As an example, when we did a program called "Will AI Steal Your Vote?" In the lead up to the UK general election a couple of years ago, and we were dealing with a lot of fake videos created by AI, and in that, to win that pitch, we sent an email. This was about 6 months after the ChatGPT 3.0, is it 3.0? I think it was a few years ago. We sent an email to the dispatches team, and it was written by ChatGPT. That was 4 weeks before most people would have thought of that. Only 4 weeks or 3 weeks, and that's why we won the pitch, because it was only that amount of time. 4 weeks later, everyone's doing that kind of thing. It's not such a genius move to think of writing something by ChatGPT. But so just things will change all the time as AI changes and people, and so it's just a changing thing. We're on everything's moving so quickly at the moment.
And when you say you're using it for pitches, and when you say it wrote it, did it give you a skeleton? Did you adjust it? Did you have to disclose it? Are you having to disclose?
Yeah. We do. I'm not. It's not a deceptive thing that we're doing. We're not using. We wrote a pitch for how AI would affect the election or something. It was written by AI, and then at the bottom we said, by the way, this was written by ChatGPT. But that was at a time where you would get to the bottom and read that it was written by ChatGPT, going, oh my God, I can't believe ChatGPT wrote that. That's incredible how clever it is. Whereas, like I say, a few weeks later or a few months later, you go, oh my God, this is written by ChatGPT. I've been conned here. So it's just it changes in the same way we have to pitch differently all the time. It changes. We move with the times, and our ideas move with the times accordingly.
Great, really interesting. Rhiannon, where are you seeing tech being used in the media industry in your reporting at the moment?
I'd say it's probably, to begin with, I'll sort of highlight some of the things that AI is like very, very good at. And we've seen some really good examples of it being put to work. So essentially, it's brilliant at analyzing data. It's really, really good at spotting patterns with particular things. Like the Associated Press used an AI tool quite recently to sift through tens of thousands of documents about they were all documents linked to the assassinations of, I think it was Martin Luther King, JFK and RFK. And so if humans were doing that, would have taken weeks, and they were able to spot very quickly the documents that had been redacted previously and now weren't. So they were able to write and, get their stories out much more quickly. And that's a great example of AI just doing something, helping humans in a way, not necessarily replacing jobs in the way I'm sure we'll discuss later on, but it's great at that sort of thing. It's also very good, depending on what it is you've set it to look for, but at spotting some certain like spellings and syntactical, grammatical kind of errors, or even just organizing notes. Also, basically, in this day and age, if I meet a journalist that says they don't use an AI transcription tool for recording interviews, I'm not sure I believe them. If you've been a journalist for longer than 10 years at least, you will have definitely had to use dictaphones in the past, transcribing interviews taking hours upon hours upon hours. Now, AI models are so much better than they were even 5 years ago at being able to go through a file really, really quickly. Might not be perfect. It's much better with American accents than it is with our British ones, but it is good at sort of giving you a very rough outline, and you're able to search very quickly to be like, oh yeah, when was I talking to them about that specific topic? So
Mm.
all of those are like examples of things that AI is very good at, and lots of different newsrooms, media organizations are already using those. I'd say where it really shouldn't be used, and unfortunately we know it has been, is essentially to write articles. I don't think, personally speaking, I don't really think there's any room in sort of like newspaper or wider kind of like broadcast offices to use generative AI models to write either like short stories or nibs or explainers or anything like that that humans should be writing. Like if you are a journalist, if you are a reporter, you should be the one wanting to do the writing. Some of that is, sort of heavy lift, dull work, and I understand the temptation for organizations to want to automate that. But I think that is a very slippery slope. It's very dangerous to adopt them blindly. And ultimately, when organizations are doing that, and we have seen this, it's kind of to cut corners, and it has resulted in job loss, which is unfortunate.
And do you think it is inevitable that that is going to be rolled out, for example, to website writing, where people will say, okay, they're still going to have human oversight with experienced people checking it, but there's a limit as to how much anything can be checked, I suppose.
It depends very much on how reputable the organization is. Unfortunately, I think we've seen very concerted and careful adoption among some of the better newsrooms, some of the less scrupulous ones, or even just general websites. Like the percentage of the internet now that's AI generated that's just slop. Like people, there's a big consensus at the moment that Google is virtually unrecognizable to how it was pre 2021, when it was still majority, at least, like a lot of the stuff that you would come across would have been written with authority by human sources. Now that percentage is getting less and less and less. So it's more AI generated slop that's just going out, being fired out on these websites, which in turn is being scraped by AI models to train the models. So the models are being trained on AI generated stuff, and it's just creating error after error after error, and it's all just completely useless.
And is it being labelled as written by AI or not?
Depending on the organization, some the more reputable ones would make a point to say AI was used to generate like this summary at the top of articles. That's quite a common use among reputable newsrooms. Less reputable ones, or ones that don't have the time, money, or resources, probably aren't labeling it as AI generated. No.
Graeme Lovelace, you're seeing this too. Obviously, you're tracking lots of different trends. Where do you think you're seeing the most change in terms of
Well,
use of AI as tools?
sure. I mean, if we talk about how it helps, so just to continue the list that Rhiannon started, absolutely things like that, like transcription, transcribing translation into multiple languages instantly, far quicker than any human could do. Um, in newsrooms, suggest the headlines, suggest the three paragraph summary at the top of the story. We're seeing that on a lot of websites now. Um, Write the picture caption, metadata for archival retrieval. I mean, this is all taking a lot of the drudgery out of commonplace workflows, and it is streamlining things within newsrooms. The real danger comes, as Rhiannon says, is when the temptation is to use a chatbot to actually write the content. Now, there are some organizations that are doing this, and if you look at the bottom of the page, you will see this most bizarre disclaimer saying that, this news story cannot be trusted, essentially. That's not news. That's some form of entertainment. I cannot see how a news story, particularly some business pages, are being written by a chatbot, amalgamating four or five sources, squeezing it all together and coming up with something which is incredibly generic, derivative, and often wrong. And this is the real danger. On the other side, how it hinders and how it harms. Yeah, we've talked about slop. So if you just search for baby peacock in Google Images, you will see the first 5 or 6 images of what looks like a baby peacock. It's a baby bird with brightly colored plumage, straight out the egg. That's not a baby peacock. Unfortunately, enough people have uploaded images to to the web, and the web is used for AI model training, that's now what the Google model believes is a baby peacock. So again, if you're an 8-year-old child writing a project on baby peacocks, you're going to choose one of those images. So there's a visual example that everyone can just see just how quickly this is drowning. Has a massive impact on what we trust, what we believe, integrity, brand integrity. When mistakes happen, it's embarrassing. Newspapers have to issue an apology. Last week, the newspaper in Pakistan, the biggest English language newspaper, had to issue an apology because the actual prompting at the end of a story saying, if you want, I can create a snappier front page version of this, ready for an infographic, that actually made its way through to print. So clearly there's not enough checks and balances within this. There's not enough human oversight. I'll come back to how we mitigate some of these risks later, no doubt.
Okay, can I just bring in, thank you very much. I'm just going to bring in a question that we've had in for Nick Parnes. This is from Eileen Willett, who says, what's your view on how to label AI generated content in factual programming to avoid materially misleading viewers as to what's real and what's not? What label would you use? Do you apply it to everything from landscapes to people? Because if this is a direction of travel, then if you have some norms that everyone is supposed to adhere to, then does that help in terms of the trust and authenticity and veracity?
Well, with the programs we've used, whenever we've made sure that the viewer is made well aware of where there has been AI, maybe not that second that it's on TV. With regards to the recent program, we only revealed it at the end. That she was an AI, but in other programs we've done, there's a kind of watermark that says it straight away. So, and that was we were told to do that as well by Channel 4, that so we wouldn't have done it any other way. But so I think there just has to be a watermark, or the viewer needs to be made aware that is when it happens.
And Rhiannon, do you think that is enforceable? Because obviously we're in a global media space, aren't we?
That's a very difficult part. It's an interesting example of this was OpenAI recently released its Sora 2 video generator. So it's kind of their answer to TikTok if it was all AI generated. And all of the videos that it sort of creates are supposed to have a watermark on it. And it's really, really easy to remove that. Like within hours of it going live, there are entire threads on various different forums instructing people how to remove it. It's a little bit like cybersecurity full stop. It's a little bit like you create these tools, you put them out into the world, and someone will try and use them for nefarious means. Like there's no way around it, essentially. So it's very difficult when places are going to go out of their way to, people will try and remove things like watermarks. But I think just using them anyway is at least a good initial sort of step. It's a good practice. It's something that a lot of the newer US newspapers do. They will label images on their site that will say this is AI generated. They'll make that very clear. If they're reposting sort of like TikToks or similar that have been AI generated, they will put notes all around it, making it very clear that it's not real, which is a good practice to get into. But ultimately, it's like people are going to still try and get around that, which is unfortunate.
Graeme, let me just bring in another question from Zasha Whiteway Wilkinson that people might be able to see, who says, as a digital news journalist, they work closely with AI to rip stories so reporters can save time on trending stories and putting them on other websites owned by the same publisher. One reason was to help the articles rank for SEO. Do you think search engines will catch on to this style of content production? And what do you think the long-term impact of online news publications will be?
So is this the threat of generative search? Is that what we're getting at?
I think so, yes. I mean,
I mean, this is one of the huge unknown quantities. This is one of the where generative AI is clearly not a friend, it is a foe. It's massively undermining the business models of journalism, and that is essentially advertising and subscription. What it's doing, what the generative search engines are able to do is essentially serve up a one-shot answer where you, the user, no longer see a list of blue links and you do the work, and you may find some stuff which you actually didn't realize you're interested in. Now you're given a few paragraphs, and essentially that's the answer. There are links in there, but there's there's no real reason to click on those links. if the answer is correct, and do check it. Now, this is having a big impact on news publishers. It's having a big impact on anyone with a website long term. News publishers rely on between a fifth and a third of all their traffic for straight advertising. But this is also surfacing content that's behind paywalls as well. So it's potentially damaging subscriptions as well. It means that the news industry is having to look for other ways and less reliance on Google, on search. This is a really, really big existential threat.
And Rhiannon, I mean, there's an attempt at pushback, I think, isn't there, by some, certainly in Europe, some of the big news providers in broadcast, for example. Where do you think we're headed on this? Because some people are really fearful, aren't they, about just traffic falling from big news providers, and then what happens?
I think that is an area that, yeah, every single media company has to contend with, and they are aware of the fact that people are, as Graeme astutely pointed out, less willing to do the legwork or the difficulty of clicking on links. That's too much effort these days. They want the Google AI overview, which not more often than not, but it is often incorrect. It hallucinates answers, it gets things wrong, and people take it as read because it's just the first thing that they've seen, and as you kind of said, it ticks the box, it answers the question for them. But I think in terms of what we were talking about earlier about trust in the media as well, that's hugely worrying. And it does make you think, if people aren't willing to do the legwork to just sort of follow a simple kind of like a digital paper trail almost from query to source to resource to actually get to the point of what the nub of the article that they're searching for, the fact that they're trying to clarify is, when that raises the question, where are people getting that information? And it is purely from these platforms, the AI companies that control these portals. Like we used to see this different sort of version of this worry when Facebook was largely like the portal to the internet in different countries, whereas people wouldn't necessarily go to like a homepage for their internet provider and navigate from there. They'd go straight from Facebook. And we're seeing this in an entirely different way now. And people are using search engines less. We're seeing more and more inroads being made by the AI companies that are creating these models. They want you to do search from within that. They want you to buy products from within that as well. That's a new push from OpenAI recently. They've been experimenting with shopping. So I think as media businesses, as organizations, that is hugely worrying. And part of the pushback that we've seen has been some of these legal cases. We have seen lawsuits, various different publishers suing AI companies are saying, you do not have permission to scrape our proprietary web pages for use in your machines unless you pay us. And that's kind of still playing out. Those copyright debates are still going on at the moment.
Yeah, and Graeme, I know you've written a lot about copyright too. Where again, it's very political. It's changeable. Where do you think that the biggest risks are for that and the direction of travel?
Well, the biggest risk is, and it's the phrase that was used in the first really big lawsuit here, which is the New York Times versus OpenAI and Microsoft, filed in December 2023. And that is the claim that the generative models and the developers behind them are essentially free riding on the massive investment in journalism to create substitutes, which then compete against the training data. Now, that phrase has been used in just about every one of the 54, 55 cases now making their way through the US courts. We've had two cases that have come to some sort of conclusion in the US. There's the Anthropic case, where the judge actually found that Anthropic was within US copyright laws, except in the use of pirated books to train the models using in pirated copies. And in the other case, in the case of Meta, the judge actually found that fair use actually did cover that. So there's a lot more cases. Fair use in the US is a doctrine within the Copyright Act, and it's dealt with on a case-by-case basis. There's not a blanket provision. So there's a long way to go with all of those cases. And the big one, as I say, the New York Times case versus OpenAI and Microsoft, where billions are at stake. That's the really big one to watch. Here recently we had the Getty Images versus Stability case that largely went in Stability's favour. Getty was unable to prove that the actual training took place in the UK, so the really substantive charges weren't actually tested in court. It was really quite an arcane conversation around something called secondary infringement and whether or not a model can be imported into the country rather like an article or an offending copyrighted product. But last week we had a very interesting case in Germany where the collecting society for the music industry called GEMA actually defeated OpenAI in a court in Munich. This is a really interesting one to watch because that actually tested European copyright law and the German interpretation of that as well. And that's important because that's the first time OpenAI has actually lost a case. They can appeal, and it probably will go on for years. But this will establish just the ownership of content that goes into these models that's been scraped, and let's be honest, has been stolen by these models. The big problem, you mentioned politics, Geeta, it ultimately is going to come down to these cases will be seen by the Trump administration as an unfair, burdensome tax. The phrase that JD Vance used and warned at the Paris summit earlier this year. And there's a big lobby in Silicon Valley which is now lobbying for somehow these cases to be set aside. Because if the payments are actually made, the Anthropic case, they settled for 1.5 billion. That's $3,100 per book. But the authors won't get anywhere near that amount of money. But they settled for 1.5 billion, but that could have gone to 60, 70, 80 billion in damages if every infringing article was actually listed. Now, there's no way that these companies are going to pay that amount out. They're not paying for the content in the first place. So they're probably not going to be able to afford or say they can't afford to make these payments. So this may come down to geopolitics, like many things that we're living through right now.
Yeah, and therefore very changeable. Nick Parnes, as someone who's obviously a creator of content, what's your take on this, and how worried are you about it?
We're not especially careful about creating sort of pitch materials not for broadcast about where it comes from when we use AI, but we're very careful when it comes to stuff that goes out on TV. What I have noticed, despite these cases and them obviously setting precedential law, which is great, it is a wild west out there. And there's no one is an expert in it in a way, because it's just in the way all these companies that they're all using quite seemingly dodgy means, that all the websites that you use seem to be kind of beta versions when you're creating this material. It's just it's no one that you look at the terms and that some of these sites that might have millions and billions of dollars behind them don't really have any terms and conditions, or when they do, it doesn't cover you for whether you can use this material on TV or for how long you can use it. It's a wild west out there, and I think that's why it's great that these cases are coming to court, because it sets a precedent. But before that, I don't know how it's being used and how it's being regulated.
Graeme, is that you saying you want to
I
come
just
back
want
in?
to come back on, and that is how you actually establish ownership, Nick. So when you did your documentary, I mean, I know other users of AI within broadcast, within TV, they're screenshotting everything they're doing. They're trying to show that they own the human expression, that there's enough human imagination and creativity so they can actually own that product. Otherwise, you have no ownership of it.
That is amazing. We are just getting more questions in. One from Phil Harding, who says, where are we now with media companies, especially in news, allowing their data to be scraped by AI sites? Are most agreeing? Obviously, I think there's different approaches, aren't there? Rhiannon, I'm going to come to you for this. Also, just to bring in another one from Tim Massenet saying, to what extent will AI companies be able to monetize consumer and reader data? But Phil Harding's question, in news, where different companies are taking different approaches, aren't they, Rhiannon?
Say so, yeah. I think like the sort of clutch of legal cases that we have seen. Again, what the companies that are bringing them tend to be the ones that have the resources to fight those cases. You know, not every media organization is going to have such deep pockets. So, you know, a lot of the times they may, and we are seeing these different kind of approaches. It's either companies very much standing up to them in a legal sense, or they might try and forbid them from using their content as being scraped to train the AI models. Or you might see companies go the other way entirely and sort of think, what can we do to get mentioned in these models? Like this is something we're actually seeing a lot in marketing, for example. So if you work in marketing and you're representing like a brand of soap, there is no better place for that brand of soap to be mentioned than on ChatGPT. So that is the biggest aim for a lot of these companies at the moment. And you also see that with Google's AI overviews, the little summaries right at the top of the search results. So companies are dying to get mentioned in those. That sort of area of prominence is something that we're seeing more and more of. And I know that a lot of marketing companies and previous like SEO agencies that would have advised companies on how to rank highly on Google are now pivoting to say this is how you can rank highly on various sort of AI chatbots.
And
So
how do I get everyone to mention my name?
so in terms, if we're using the
Beacon of
SEO
trust.
kind of like that model, the best way to rank highly on Google back in the day was to be mentioned by reliable, prominent websites that have like a track history of having posted for a long time on the web, and they generally have like large readership. So if you're a big brand, for example, it's more likely that if you're Coca-Cola, that's more likely to show up in highly in Google, but also in a search and sorry, an AI chatbot. But in terms of being mentioned lots and lots in a bot, again, that's just scraping directly from the internet more often than not. As far as we know, these companies aren't terribly transparent with how they get the data that their models are trained on. A lot of the time, academics and journalists and other people that are keeping an eye on these processes are using a lot of guesswork because the companies aren't clear about where they're getting it from. But the likelihood of being mentioned in a chatbot is partly just prominence on the web, partly luck at this moment in time. Obviously, marketing companies will tell you they can sell you all sorts of courses to get your brand mentioned all the time. So there will be some media organizations, I imagine, across the world that will think, oh, well, yeah, let's do that. Let's not fight the AI companies. Let's do everything we can to get mentioned by them and just to
Yes.
sort of give in to this inevitability as they see it. Not every company will follow that path, but I imagine a fair few of them will.
And Rhiannon, are you seeing, I mean, globally, different countries have got different cultural takes on this. The politics is different, isn't it, in terms of their enthusiasm for the use of their resistance to it. There's obviously Western reliance on the US tech stack, etc. But again, can you just give us a bit of a flavour of yeah, just, is there a big global divergence on this?
I think there is, yeah. I'd say sort of globally attitudes to AI and the resistance that we've seen from a lot of the like large media organizations in the West isn't the same in different nations. Like lots of other countries, AI is colossal and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Like we've seen in India, for example, ChatGPT is huge. Like OpenAI, that's a massive market for them. But there's also sort of homegrown, like native startups that are starting to sort of challenge the dominance of the big tech companies that historically just sort of say, oh, we've got a fraction of the languages that are spoken in India. That's good enough. Let's roll that out. So we're starting to see startups in India, for example, that have much, much, much wider representation of languages, where the kinds of websites that would traditionally be used to train AI models generally written in Western languages, so lots of European languages, English, obviously. But different parts of the world are using their own languages, which are make up a sort of lower percentage of the web. So that in itself is interesting, but we know less about kind of how they're being trained or the kind of guardrails that might go into those as well. We've got a better sense of how the OpenAIs, Microsofts, the Googles of the world are operating, but sort of smaller, more agile startups might come in different parts of the world, might come at it very differently.
Yeah. And this is all sounding like we're all really worried. So, but there are loads of amazing opportunities. We had a fantastic internal week at the BBC last week of all of us trying to get increase the AI literacy within the organisation. And I chaired one event with a brilliant producer working for BBC Studios, and she was explaining how the differences, obviously with news or say natural history or certain channels, they're very tight. Some don't want any AI at all. But if you take history and the ability to recreate a battle scene, or obviously the sort of boundless possibilities in entertainment and comedy and history. And I just wondered, Nick Parnes, do you see that in your colleagues who are, making content? I mean, because we all know that people individually at home now have got limitless possibilities, and it's just really, it feels like to me that it's changing, just really fundamentally changing the nature of what's possible, and therefore how you're going to make money, frankly, from selling ideas.
But before we came on, Graeme, I don't want to steal the words out of Graeme's mouth. Graeme was talking about, and it'd be good to what you said, Graeme. It'd be good to hear what you said about how it steals people, it steals creativity. Can you just say that? Because I have a response to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the things that I'm increasingly very worried about. And it started earlier this year. There were two studies, if you remember, that came out. One was from MIT and the other one was from Microsoft. And it basically said that those two studies said the more you use generative products, the lazier you become, the more likely you are to use it again, and the less likely you are to check the outputs. Now, this is calamitous, but what's even more calamitous is the fact that we're going to then be lulled into this sense that I can't do something now without it. So this idea that you're offloading your cognitive load, this potentially could dull our creative spark. So the key thing is to know when you're using it. Bring it on at the end. Don't start at the beginning. If you're starting to write a document or even an email, have a go at doing it yourself. If you start off using generative AI right at the beginning, it's not yours. You won't remember it. There's none of you in it. There's a very recent study where they actually got a team of people, those that did use generative products, those that used none whatsoever. And within half an hour, those that had used generative products to supposedly write a document, they couldn't remember a single word after half an hour. After half an hour, those that had written it from scratch could recite it verbatim still. Now, again, just think it through in terms of everyone watching this. When you're using this, there is this sort of sneaky feeling that you're cheating, that you're taking a shortcut, but you're actually taking a shortcut with your own imagination, your own brain. And the more you use this, it will atrophy. The brain is a muscle. You need to keep on using your own creative ideas.
So,
Yeah, I mean, Sarah Ramsden has sent in a question exactly saying this, saying human creativity is like a muscle, it needs exercise. So are we now facing the diminution of human creativity?
so I agree.
Nick?
I agree with everything that Graeme said. However, I just think we need to work out ways of being creative with it. So in the same way, when influencers, as they used to be called, I think they're now called creators on TikTok or YouTube or whatever it was back then when it started, just like, as a TV producer, I said, I can't believe it. They're just making a single camera in their bedroom doing shortened versions of the type of programs we've been doing for years and putting all our art into and all our energies into. They're doing it in 5 seconds in a much worse format. But I've learned, but now when I'm talking to my kids, I want them to use, as I said to my kid the other day, there's never been a better time for you to do this. As long as you persevere and keep creating content, not that he does it at all, but if you wanted to do it, there's never been a better time to actually create content online and to actually get viral that way, because the platform allows for that. And in the same way, so now it's a case of how do we use AI to be creative? I completely agree that there are ways that it can make you lazy and reliant, but there are ways where you can actually just think really cleverly about it. Like, I don't know, I'm sure lots of people have seen, there's a recent one with a guy, it's like he's directing AI actors. It's an Instagram meme at the moment where there's a director and he's directing actors who are AI. So he'll say, okay, can we do that take again? But this time, don't have a third hand that just appears out of nowhere. Can we try just only have two hands when you're performing this next one? Because obviously, as I was saying earlier, it's so glitchy, the technology. So anyway, my point is, it's a funny meme. It's a really creative way of talking about the limitations of AI. And I think, as with everything, anything that comes along, yes, it will take jobs, but it will also mean that we need to be creative about what jobs become, what a definition of a job becomes.
Yeah, we'll come on to jobs in just one moment. Rhiannon, I just wanted to ask you what you're seeing sort of on the creative side, because again, there are sort of endless possibilities. And I'm seeing with some of the people on my course, for example, some of the things that they're creating from, clones and companions. And I don't want to sort of sound like a cliched parent person here, but it does feel a bit like there is this generational split, and partly in terms of what, Graeme, you were saying, that we are used to writing our own emails, doing our own searches. We're journalists, we're trained to check everything. And you just wonder how that will change for young children who are growing up in this very different sort of different environment. Because there are, even I, for example, using LLMs now, the way that I'm using it is changing all the time, because I have realized that it can be incredibly useful in some scenarios, but you've just got to check everything and not rely on it. But it can give you, it's a big time saver, isn't it? But it's a bit like, well, do you read the book first and then go and see the movie adaptation? Because we want to go to our first sources first. But Rhiannon, I just wondered, yes, first of all, do you think there are generationally different ways of using this, and what are the big opportunities?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the generational differences are massive. Like, you will see young people are just so au fait with just interacting with any kind of system like this. Like, we used to see it, like people would talk how quickly like toddlers could use iPads, for example. Like, children and the students and the pupils of today there's no putting the genie back in the bottle when it comes to AI in education. Like, even if you don't want your children to use, not you personally, but if parents don't want like their children to use AI at home, there's a good chance they might be using it in the classroom. So I think just educating is really, really important around this, and telling kids about what AI is good at, which is condensing things or explaining ideas in different ways. Like, it can be an incredible study aid. But it's interesting what the sort of perspective we were talking about creativity. And this very much depends on how you would define creativity, because AI, by its definition, is not and can never be creative. Because if you're defining creativity as creating something from nothing, AI is not capable of that, because AI can only ever riff off what it's been trained off of, which is why, if you ask it to draw a horse in the style of Picasso, it goes, oh yeah, I know what that looks like, because I've, ingested millions of websites that show me Guernica. Like, I know what Picasso thought a horse looks like. Whereas if you asked it to, how would I draw a horse or something, it wouldn't have the first clue where to begin, because that's data it hasn't been trained on. So I think that is really interesting. It very much depends on our definition of whether we want something truly original, which AI is not capable of, or whether we're going to use it to kind of like a little bit what Nick was talking about, to sort of remix or to riff on or have a play around with stuff is great, and just experiment. And it can help people come up with ideas or take them in different directions they may not have come up with otherwise. And some people find that incredibly instructive and useful. But in terms of like where we go from here, I think, yeah, when we're talking to younger generations, it's just really important to hammer home the limitations. Just say you have to check, you have to be aware that this is not the first answer it gives you is pretty unlikely to give you the whole picture. There's still great value in dusty old books, whether you might not want to read them or not, but they're a great resource. And just teaching children that sort of AI literacy, I think, is a really important step. It's a boring answer, but it's the right one.
Well, let's come back to jobs, because Nick, we did start off talking about your documentary on is AI going to take all of our jobs. Did you look into it? Have you looked into it, Nick, in terms of the media industry generally? I know you looked into sort of some parts of the creative sector on this. And what's your prediction?
Well, I mean, I think as normally, as people say, it's the white collar jobs that are at risk, and it's the people that use their hands that are less likely to be at risk. That was proved to be the case with our show. But like I say, I mean, my theory is that people just need to learn how to use AI as part of their job now, in order to and their job will evolve accordingly, and jobs will evolve accordingly, and that's the way the world will go.
Yeah. Zasha Whiteway Wilkinson is asking this: Is it worth journalists retraining in AI to help secure their future in the industry? Rhiannon, obviously yes, I imagine.
I think awareness is really, really important. I think there will be a lot of courses, some of which are really well informed and very, very smart, and will teach you genuine valuable skills that are worth looking at. Some skills, otherwise, I think a lot of it you can research yourself for what it's worth. Like, the internet is full of really, really useful resources. And I think as long as you, as a discerning human, can look and say, okay, this looks like it's, valuable and worth my time, not just sort of taking everything at face value and being like, not all AI courses will be created equal, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I think it's important to try to do your homework, but awareness of AI definitely, I think, is just really, really important for all journalists. The direction of just media industry in general, just all kind of jobs, like apart from, like Nick say, certain, if you're a hairdresser or a builder, you're probably much, much better equipped to weather the AI revolution than if you sit behind a keyboard all day, every day, like I do. So yeah,
And
awareness
that
really,
sort
really
of,
important.
without necessarily you wanting to endorse any particular courses, I don't know if you've got any off the top of your head anyway, but if you're going to say, to all of us who are working, people who are thinking about coming into the industry, what are the skills that they should get now?
I'd say familiarize yourselves with the really, really big AI companies and the limitations of what those models are. For example, like ChatGPT from OpenAI is by far the biggest model that's used by the most people. Have a check and see, just try, I think, experiment with it to a certain extent. Try and work out the kind of, when you notice when it gets things wrong and why it gets things wrong. A really interesting sort of rich seam of research at the moment is that AI can't tell the time. If you ask large language models to look at pictures of clocks, like analog clocks, it completely freaks out. It can't work it out. And that is a silly example, but a good one, being like, a human, like an 8-year-old can tell the time. So sort of learning to what it is good at and using it for those things, those condensing notes, organizing things, maybe like is really, really, really good at drawing stuff into tables. If you ever struggle with that in a word processing document or anything, it's great at that. But yeah, not over relying on it blindly, and certainly not using it to take the joy out of life, really. Like recently I was with some friends, and one of them had shortlisted a load of films for us to watch, and then afterwards he said, oh, actually I used AI to make this list. And I thought, oh, that's really sad. Like, why like, choosing and that this sort of very human thing of being like, oh, I read about this and I decided, no, actually I don't really like the sound of that, and I think this would be better suited to our purposes. Just outsource the whole thing to a chatbot, and that just sort of robs you of the spice of life a bit, I think.
Graeme, what's your prediction on the jobs front? Because we've heard, for example, 30% of jobs overall across all industries will go. Lots of predictions already that's happening in graduate job market. What are you seeing?
Yeah, there's jobs, there's tasks within jobs as well. That's probably the other thing to think through. There are certain tasks that we all have within our jobs which are going to be automated out. And it's whether or not some people in our multifaceted creative industries are going to feel the brunt of that more than others. So right now, when my newsletter goes out, it goes out over 125 countries. I get a lot of people sending me their stories. So those that are hurting right now, translators, particularly literary translators, that used to work with an author and translate that book into multiple languages, where in some languages a word didn't exist. So they had to work with the author to understand nuance no AI can do that. What those people are now receiving is a first pass Google Translate or another form of AI output, and they're told to tidy it up. The same with illustrators, same with a lot of photographers, just tidy up this AI slop. Now, that could be seen to be creating a new class of worker who doesn't actually have the creative skills. So you could see that as a sort of slight positive. But the task is something that, really to be aware of. What I really worry about is the low-level internship jobs, the jobs that people would learn on the job, and by watching other people. And it's the low paid, or as I say, often free jobs that are probably going to be automated out. So at what level will people actually go into TV production, that, Nick's area? What level will they go into? Because they probably won't go in as, they might go in as runners still, but, junior editors, that sort of thing. A lot of that's going to be using AI platforms. So that's a real worry.
And a question from Zasha, if I can ask this to you, Rhiannon, who says, how can journalists who are applying for jobs escape the dreaded AI scanner that believes people are AI when they're not? She says, as a neurodivergent person, she's been marked as AI in certain software. Can we as an industry combat this?
Oh, that's rough. I'm sorry to hear that. I think it's very difficult, if cold comfort, but for what it's worth, you're not alone. Like, I think lots and lots of people have been complaining about this on LinkedIn as well. When they sort of apply for jobs through that, they worry about it's getting filtered out right at the first stages. And I've seen plenty of stories about some people have resorted to, I'm not saying you should do this, but some people have resorted to sort of peppering their CV with certain sort of keywords, like that they think that the company may be screening for, and putting them in white text so it doesn't show up on the actual document, but enough for it to be read as metadata. Again, I'm not advocating for that, but I know that's what some people are doing in an effort to get around these systems. But it is rough. I think it's really bad that companies are just using AI as a very general sort of filter, and they're probably missing out on all sorts of wonderful applicants on all sorts of levels. So hopefully this is the very first sort of like nascent wave of kind of AI screening for jobs, and companies will build better processes as a result, because I think they probably will struggle to hire properly in the roles if they're just using these blanket rules. But good luck in your job search. I hope you get something good soon.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to round up with a couple of questions because we're really out of time, but one from Julian Wilkins, who says, does the panel consider there's been sufficient political will to develop international rules? We've had a couple of questions on regulation, for example, like the Atomic Energy Agency standards. I mean, there's lots of different models out there that are touted, aren't there, as comparators to protect against AI misuse. Or of human-created intellectual property. That's the copyright question. And then Ivor Gabber has said, will there come a time when a newspaper or magazine have as their USP AI-free zone? I'm going to ask you to answer one or both of those questions. Graeme, do start.
Yep, bottom line newsletter says human-made. I believe that good old-fashioned, authentic, pungent human media will come back. We'll probably go through 3 years of a lot of slop, a lot of synthetic content, but we'll rediscover human-made content with all its flaws as well, but all its brilliance and charm, because we love it. We love hearing stories from humans that we can identify with. It will come back like vinyl did.
Interesting. Nick Parnes, we haven't even touched on the climate questions and the sustainability questions, which I know is one area that people are really concerned about. What's your take on whether you think we'll end up with having AI-free zones and resistance?
I think it would be hard to have a completely AI-free zone, in the same way. Of course, it's easy for me to say which bits of my program are created by AI. But a newspaper, for example, the journalist doing the research might use ChatGPT in order to create the article that he or she is going to write. So AI has been used in that process. And gradually that will bleed into lots of the ways that you write and newspaper. So I think, I think it will be human only, and there will be notes saying that it's human only. But I think that as to how actually human only it is, will be hard to decipher and quite a grey area.
Rhiannon, regulation and human only. What's your take on regulation, just quickly?
So I think in terms of international regulation efforts, which I think was the original kind of framing of your question. I think everyone would agree that's kind of lacking, like in terms of international cooperation. It's been very, very difficult for different territories to actually agree in any meaningful way. We've seen certain blocks in certain areas, like we've seen the EU AI Act, which recently there was a report came out that's looking like they are going to look to water down some of their regulations because they're getting pressure from the US government, which is very pro AI at the moment in terms of them being American companies, the majority of the giants. So it's pro AI until it decides it's not. So that's very difficult when you're getting lent on by different sort of parts of the world, but also different areas. Like California recently passed an AI Act, which essentially makes AI model creators much more legally liable for what their models do and create. And that was in reaction to a lot of the awful recent news stories we've seen about teenager deaths in links to prolonged interaction with AI chatbots. So the regulation, it is moving. It is an area that I think like all countries and various territories or powerful states within America are very much paying attention to. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But has enough been done to this point? No. I think you're right to single that out. And it is a little bit like, well, the technology moves so much faster than law, and we've seen this for the past, since the since the dot-com boom the first time around. So we're just going to see more of the same, but hopefully it will move and be more proactive, especially when it comes to sort of preserving, like when people's lives are at stake, they will move much more quickly.
And Rhiannon, do you think there will be AI free zones, or do you think actually we've talked a lot about the risks and the worries in the last hour. Do you think, there's a lot of positive possibilities that people are embracing and experimenting with now, aren't there?
Absolutely. I think I can completely see like certain publications like proudly marketing themselves as AI free. I think that would really appeal to a certain load of readers, and vice similarly, I'd say, you will get hopefully a lot of kind of like almost resistance-led art from humans, that are sort of people reacting against that and saying, well, my personal opinion, I think AI generated art looks awful. I don't think it has a soul. I don't think it really speaks to people. But then I do think it can inspire people that may think, well, I've seen that, like, that's out and that's prevalent on the internet. I think that's terrible. I can do much better than that. I'm going to start selling my own sort of visions, my own paintings on Etsy or similar. Like, I think there will be a movement of like younger makers and creators that see what AI has done to music or to painting or to art more generally and go, I can do much better than that. So, I'd love to see that. And I'm sure it's already sort of beginning to happen. And I'd love to see more of it, essentially.
Well, it's been fantastic to talk to you all. Discussion's gone in lots of different directions. We're going to wrap it up there. Rhiannon Williams, Nick Parnes, Graeme Lovelace, thank you all very much indeed for spending the last hour with us. And thank you all for sending in the questions and for being with us. Bye for now.